Episode 5. From Jesus to Empire. How Doctrine was fixed, not found. In the name of God, the one God of Abraham, in the last episode, we reached a difficult but necessary conclusion that Paul's theology does not fully align with the standard Jesus himself set, particularly concerning the law and the first commandment. Today, we ask a different question, not whether Paul was sincere, but how his interpretation became dominant, because beliefs do not become doctrine by accident. Part 1. What does Gentile actually mean? Before we go any further, we need to clarify a term that is often used, but rarely explained. Gentile. In the first century, a Gentile simply meant anyone who was not Jewish. That included of the Roman Empire. Jesus lived and taught, almost in taught, and the vast majority of the Roman Empire. Jesus lived and taught almost entirely among Jews. His message was delivered in a Jewish legal framework, using Jewish scripture, addressing Jewish expectations of the Messiah, but Rome was not Jewish. Part 2. What was Rome before Christianity? Before Christianity, Rome was polytheistic, ritual-based, and deeply pragmatic. Romans worshipped many gods. Religion was not primarily about belief. It was about loyalty, public ritual, and social order. What Rome valued most was unity, obedience, and stability. But 3. Why Jewish Christianity was difficult for Gentiles. The earliest followers of Jesus were Jewish. They kept the law of Moses, observed dietary restrictions, practiced circumcision, and maintained Jewish identity. For a Gentile Roman, this was a high barrier. To join fully meant adopting Jewish law, adopting Jewish customs, and often becoming socially and politically isolated. This is not interpretation. It is recorded history. Part 4. Why Paul's version was different. Paul offered something new. He taught that Gentiles did not need circumcision, did not need to keep Jewish dietary law, did not need to become Jewish. Instead, faith alone was sufficient. Salvation was framed as internal belief, allegiance to Christ, rather than obedience to the law. For Gentiles, the largest barriers, Christianity could now spread without requiring Jewish identity. Part 5. Why this mattered sociologically. This does not mean Paul designed his theology for empire, but it does mean his theology was compatible with empire in a way Jewish Christianity was not. One required law, a discipline, and submission to God's commands. The other required belief, allegiance, and theological assent. Rome understood ants. Part 6. The historical anchors scholars agree on. Now we anchor this in history. First, Paul's authentic letters are dated by historians to around the years 50 to 60% of the first century. The written Gospels appear later, Mark around 70, Matthew and Luke around 80 to 90, John toward the end of the first century. This means Paul's interpretation of Jesus circulated widely before Jesus' teachings were preserved in full narrative form. That is not speculation, it is standard New Testament scholarship. Second, the city of Jerusalem, the center of Jesus' earliest followers, was destroyed by Rome in the year 70. With it went the temple, law-centered leadership, and the original Christian base. Authority shifted westward, away from Jerusalem, and into Gentile cities. Third, for nearly 3 centuries, Christianity had no single creed. There were multiple Christologies, disagreements about the law, and competing understandings of Jesus' status. This diversity is acknowledged by Christian historians themselves. Part 7. Constantine and the fixing of doctrine. Everything changes. In the 4th century, enter Constantine the Great. Constantine was not a theologian. He was an emperor. His concern was not doctrine, but unity. So in the year 325 he convened the Council of Nicaea. The question was not, what did Jesus teach? It was, what belief will unify the church and stabilize the empire? Part 8. What was decided? At Nicaea, bishops debated the nature of Jesus. Was he subordinate to God or equal with God? This was not settled by Jesus' own words alone. It was settled by voting, imperial pressure, and political necessity. Used metaphysical language. Jesus never uses of himself. Those who disagreed were marginalized, exiled, or declared heretical. Doctrine was now enforced. Part 9. What was lost? Jewish Christian groups who upheld strict monotheism, kept the law, and rejected divine status for Jesus, were pushed the margins, were not preserved, not because they lost the argument, but because they lost power. That is recorded by church historians of the period. Final reflection. So, when we ask how Paul's theology became dominant, we do not need conspiracy, we need context. Paul's version removed Jewish barriers, spread easily among Gentiles, and aligned with imperial needs. When empire embraced Christianity, it embraced the version, already most compatible with imperial life. That is history. Closing. This series is not asking you to abandon faith. It is asking you to examine its history honestly, because truth does not fear history. It survives it. In the next episode, we will turn to Islam's claim, not as replacement, but as restoration, of the monotheism Jesus himself affirmed, truth before tribe. 2 brothers. 1 mission. 1 God.